And we are live. This is the council. The council's now in session. I'm John Wilkinson, hosting tonight's show. And tonight we are recovering from a discussion that we've had on Apologetics Live concerning Molinism. Probably one of the most confusing views to have within Christian doctrines. And it's always a head scratcher for me. I never can really grasp it entirely, other than the whole middle knowledge thing. I don't agree with it. I don't agree that Molinism is an acceptable view. It has its problems. So, recovering from the right word, right? So, Andrew, if you can stop playing with your computer.
Sorry, these are just things that come up.
Yeah. So anyway, tonight we have Chris Harris from the council. We have Tyler Vela from the Free Thinker podcast. But I think his mic is not working tonight, so he's going to be rather quiet. And then we have a couple of guests also. We got Andrew from Australia and Charlie Spine, which I think, though, his microphone is not working also. And then we have a couple other people, Carrie, and we also have another person named Seeking. Oh, what is it? Seeking the Narrow Way. She was here a few weeks ago, and she has some questions about various things. And so I'm going to go ahead and just open the floor and just have an open discussion about whatever comes to mind, guys. If you want to continue on with the whole Molinism thing, I think we should tackle that, or you don't have to do something else. I don't care. It's my show. Any other thoughts about that, or you guys want to just tackle something else? Well, if no one wants to pop up at the moment, I do have some stuff that's on my heart right now, dealing with what's been going on with my life personally. First off, and I posted this in the council's Facebook page. I woke up this morning seeing a text from a friend of mine who her husband passed away after 2 years of a battle of leukemia. So he finally died in his sleep. He was a Christian guy. He was, just an outstanding guy. I loved the guy a lot. And he passed away. His name is Jeff Green, just a good friend of mine, and he will be very much missed. But it was just a kick in the pants to be woken up and seeing that. So that really broke my heart, and it just really affected me throughout the first part of my morning. And then I mentioned earlier in another episode, I think a while ago, that I started a new job with the post office, and I find out today that I was let go. So don't know why, but hey, that's the way that it rolls, I guess, sometimes with the federal government. So really just, it was a hard day today for me personally. So anyway, that's pretty much what has been going on with my life personally. It was a rough day, I would say. So, but I feel that God's still in control. But there was also another part of me saying, well, if God was in control, why in the world did he have all this stuff lined up for me? Because this was a long process. I don't know if you guys ever know, but like getting a job at the post office, my goodness, it's like a 3-week ordeal, nonstop. I mean, they just run you ragged for like 3 weeks. So, and then all of a sudden, after working there for about almost a month, then they let me go. So it's kind of frustrating. So, God's sovereign. But what are you gonna do?
Well, yeah, I know what that's like. Before I was a courier, I was with Domino's Pizzas for a little while delivering pizzas, and then in store they put me on a trial. After 3 months, I turned up at the store and they said no more work. So, as for dealing with the death of a friend, can't really agree with that. I can't deal with that because
All right.
all of my friends have not died yet that I know of, if I had any. As in, still got its control. Yeah, gone through a marriage breakup and all of that, and job loss myself. So I know what the questioning is. Indeed. You know, I was questioning it myself that I was going to be leaving Christianity altogether. Maybe what, 3 months ago?
Right. Right.
That's really all I got to say on that.
Hmm.
I've also been accused of not participating in a couple of things, so I'd like to increase if I could.
Checking my audio now.
Hey, there you go. There is the
Mr.
big man.
Norton.
Wish I knew what I did to make it work.
That is the voice of Charlie Spine. Link
Mr.
extraordinaire.
Hey, John, I think I'm up and running too.
Hey, wow. Right on. Cool. Thanks.
I just don't. It's a new setup. I don't know if my mic is picking up the audio from the speakers.
No, it's actually sounding pretty good.
Sweet.
There's no feedback. Is that if that's what you're asking?
Yeah, feedback or echo or
Right.
There's a little, but not enough.
The only
I wondered the same thing on my end.
Yeah, a lot of the software nowadays, they seem to have a really good type of software where it cancels out that feedback most of the time anyways, but unless like you're in Australia where
we've got the NBN
Yeah.
coming. I'm getting that in July of this year, and the people that have gone through that have been, it's a week of hell.
Yeah.
That's a Christian describing it.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you guys are back on. So I was wondering concerning the last hangout with Molinism, Tyler. You made a lot of good points on the chat, but you didn't really get the chance to speak up or anything. But there was I felt a lot of dodging sometimes, where he just kind of he wouldn't get into specifics, and whenever he would have his own definition of these type of meanings, and so it was really frustrating a lot of the times because and that's how it is mostly whenever I do have a conversation with a Molinist, is they seem to have their own little dictionary of words that is always hard to nitpick and find out what they mean. So anyway, what was your
I've noticed that too, John. They not only equivocate, they'll equivocate on their own terms as time passes by.
The thing I found problematic was that his arguments and his definitions weren't biblically derived. They did not come from the scriptures. They came from his own philosophical thinking. So, for instance, whenever he talked about the issues of Molinism, he never referred to scripture. He never went, well, this is what scripture says. So scripture wasn't his basis. He had a philosophical idea that he was importing, and he was going to get the Bible to match up with that philosophical idea.
It seems pretty typical when I talk to Molinists.
It is. Whereas the way to do any theology is you go to the scripture first and you bring out from the scripture what it says. You don't impose things on the scripture.
Exactly.
That's true.
But I want to make it clear to anyone who is leaning towards a Molinistic view that, you know, it's not, you know, a heretical view. It's just I find it to have issues. I just find it to have problems. But you know, I think Seeking was in the last hangout also with us, and she said that she did lean more towards that view. So you know, I don't want to discourage her or anything and just tell her, oh, you know, you're a heretic or anything. But but I just kind of wonder if she wants to flesh out any more of her views, or you ask questions about it if you have any.
Well, I can say that I don't think I agree with Molinism. I definitely have to research it a bit more. But it just seems to me that all of this talk about trying to understand things from God's point of view is seems a bit ambitious to me. I think that with Adam and Eve being the first people, being created by God, it has to be a libertarian free will because we all come from that, from you know, their existence and their reproducing. As far as God, I don't know, the way that the conversation sounded in the last hangout, it was almost like God is handpicking worlds for each person. And I just don't see it being that way.
Just to get back to what you said about Adam and Eve, do you differentiate between their world before they fell in the Garden of Eden and their world after they fell in the Garden of Eden?
I differentiated in that God was with them before, like in the Garden of Eden, and then after they sinned, that's when there was that separation and the world heading towards death. That's the differentiation I have. I don't think that human beings lost their free will from that.
Do you believe that humanity fell on Adam?
Fell as in...
Adam was our federal head, and when Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, all of humanity was corrupted by sin?
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that we are corrupted by sin, but I think that's a different, to me, that's a different conversation than whether or not we have free will. Like we can be geared towards evil. We can have terrible thoughts in our heart, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to do what we want to do.
I wished I'd have joined earlier in the other session because I don't know if you got into the idea of compatibilist free will compared to the libertarian free will. And juxtaposed the two. Okay, well, I ran away from Molinism when the Molinists I talked to suggested that God could learn something along the way.
I don't believe that.
Yeah. When they suggested that, I ran. The idea of compatibilist free will. I mean, your free will is structured or governed by your nature. God has compatibilist free will. I mean, he doesn't have the will to sin or to stop being God if he so willed. That would be contrary to his nature. So I lean way over toward the compatibilist free will side.
Yeah. Question, Charlie. How does the teacher learn something if he's taught?
How does someone learn something when?
No. How does the teacher learn something off his student if he's teaching the student?
Sometimes the student can bounce back with something that the teacher hadn't considered before, and then he can weigh that and see how it measures up.
Yeah, but in the sense of where God knows absolutely everything, how are you going to teach God anything?
Is that what the Molinist is proposing? He can teach God something?
I don't know. That's the way I took it to go, and I just thought I'd pose the question because I can't see how. Well, I mean, if the teacher's learning from the subject, but it's something they haven't considered. Okay, but what if it's something they have considered?
Yeah, that would make God Homer Simpson. And
Yes, exactly.
An open theist would believe that. I'm not sure if a Molinist would believe that.
Well, what the Molinists would say is because they do say that God picks between an infinite amount of possible worlds, right, filled with all the counterfactual.
well, sure, he knows all the he knows all the possible contingencies.
That all libertarian free creatures could do. Right, right. But from the Molinist view, right, those libertarian free choices are. I mean, I don't know exactly how they would say it, but they would have to say that they're kind of just out there in the ethos or something. There's something other than him that he learns from, and this is the reasoning. Some reasoning, whatever his criteria is for choosing to actuate this world was. It was based on those choices, and where did those choices come from, right? So Molinism brings up a lot of issues with God's attributes, such as aseity, and it would actually make God contingent on the libertarian free choices of creatures.
That's where I find a big problem too. Exactly.
I mean, and the other thing is, where is any of that found in the Bible, where God is actualizing different worlds that things can happen in? You can't find that anywhere in the scriptures. That type of language is foreign to the Bible.
That's the most poignant thing to me, that you can't reconcile that with scripture just about anywhere you go.
Right. Well, they would base that on some passages, at least that show counterfactuals, right? Like if these miracles had been done here, then they would have repented. So it's an if-then situation. And they would take from those situations, look, there are counterfactuals. So there are other things that are possible, or other worlds that could have possibly been created, right? Or a world where Sodom and Gomorrah were shown miracles that caused them to repent.
Sodom and Gomorrah is a miracle. I'm a little confused.
So they just take language like that. But no, I would agree that it's even the posit no, it's where Jesus said that if the miracles have been done, the miracles that were done in is it Asadia? Anyway, that he did, they would have been. He said been done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented. So it's just a counterfactual. So they would base a lot of their views on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's healthy to take an egocentric view of something when we can always go to theological theocentric view and look at it from as much as we can from the way God presents it himself to us. I don't like the man-centered kind of thinking. It scares me.
I would agree with that, but I don't have a problem with talking philosophy, because if there's nothing wrong with philosophy. To do theology, you have to do philosophy. You just need your philosophy to be informed by your theology.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with philosophy, but revelation comes before philosophy. And if your philosophy is not compatible with God's revelation, then there's something wrong. And that's the problem with Molinism. It is not biblically, does not come out of the scriptures. It's merely a philosophy that came from Molina, came from a Roman Catholic during the Reformation. And it was an argument against the reformers and their belief in free will. That's the origin of it. So it has very sketchy beginnings anyway. So
yeah, I've always said that philosophy is a slave of truth. So I mean, basically, the question is, though, is where do you get your truth from? And that's what it comes down to. And so, if it comes from God, then I think you're on the right path. Anyway, when it comes to Molinism, I couldn't believe, I was kind of doing some research on it last hangout, and there's so many different types of terms that you have to kind of know and all that. I mean, you got, first of all, you got the absolute will of God. You got the compatibilist free will. You got the conditional will of God. You got counterfactuals. You have foreknowledge. You have God's knowledge of the future events that are contingent on. You have free knowledge. And then you have libertarian free will. Then you have middle knowledge. Then there's another thing called natural knowledge, and prevenient grace is another one that they kind of throw in. And then there's obviously providence.
Sounds pretty simple.
Yeah, you think it does. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like they've built quite an attractive but unnecessary web.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. It is a lot of.
Yeah, and no matter what thread of the web you touch, it's sticky.
Well, it's designed to trap you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we should be somewhat fair and charitable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I want to say that all these are valuable definitions and phrases that we should definitely know and to get a biblical understanding of what they mean. I was going to throw you in there, Tyler, because Tyler from the Free Thinker podcast, he came out with a whole series about Molinism, and he had just an in-depth collection of all sorts of podcasts and research material of it. And so I was going to throw you in there, Tyler. What are your thoughts on this? And yeah, I definitely want to be fair and cordial towards the people who are leaning towards the Molinist view, despite the fact that I don't agree with it.
Yeah, I think I mean, we should realize that a bunch of those, those concepts, natural knowledge, free knowledge, those are all things that even as a Reformed Calvinist, I'm going to say, I affirm that God has natural knowledge and free knowledge. Those are just the ways that we talk about God's knowledge of Himself and His knowledge of His creation. I mean, and you know me pretty well. I think Molinism is about as false can be. I mean, I was like frantically typing my comments at almost. I have a problem with almost every single statement and affirmation of Molinism. To be honest, I mean, it's just I think it can be so easily picked apart on almost every single level. But we do want to make sure we understand it properly. So I think Seeking the Narrow Way said it almost sounded like that there was a God was handpicking a possible world for every person or something like that. When they're talking about possible worlds, they don't mean like parallel worlds or but it's possible world semantics and modal logic, where really you're just talking about other ways the actual world could have been. So when Eric's talking about a possible world where I could have 3 more hairs than I have, it's just a semantic way of talking about there's a logically possible way that this world could have been.
Right. Basically, they're saying, look, I'm given a choice. I can either go A or B. If I choose A, something else in that future is going to happen. But if I choose B, another thing will happen that could.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. I mean, I try to be as simplistic as I can possibly, and I just like to think of it as just one linear timeline that God already knows.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I try to keep it as simple as possible. But that's me because I'm an idiot.
No, you're not at all. You're not at all.
That's actually how I look at it too. It's just so much simpler.
It's just a straight timeline. This is from point A to point B, from creation to eternity.
Yeah.
And, God knows.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of my things against Molinism, and I have quite a few, is that I think it's entirely inconsistent with itself. So I don't even need to really present any concepts outside of it or do any type of external critique. I mean, I can say, well, when Eric oftentimes would say one thing and then he would contradict himself later, necessarily just by affirming the things that Molinism affirms. So he wants to say something like, I am in order for me to have libertarian free will, I have to be the first mover of my own will. Now I already want to push them and be like, I don't even know what it means for someone to be a first mover if they're a contingently existing thing. Like, I know what it means for God to be a first mover. A first mover is an unmoved mover. Yeah. Well, you know, me, even as the whatever, you know, the source of my libertarian, I'm not an unmoved mover. I have my God-given nature and my surroundings and my context. And, you know, he would say things like, well, as you know, my desires don't determine my my choice, but myself does. Okay, well, I don't even know what you mean self then, if you don't mean your own mind or your own nature or your own desire. Like, what is this abstraction that you're calling a self? If no attribute of that self determines your will, then the self just becomes a vacuous concept. I don't even know what it means to say that the self determines that. But the real point behind this, and I'm only bringing this up to kind of show that you kind of have this little buildup of inconsistencies. The real problem is that on Molinism, metaphysically, there's a major problem. So he wants to say that, you know, my desires or my nature doesn't determine my will, right? But in order to make Molinism work, God has to know which possible worlds, which worlds are quote unquote feasible based on the decisions you would make, right? So he gave the example. There's no possible world where I would eat a pile of dog poop freely. Right? I think he said for $1, but let's just say he wouldn't do it freely for free. Well, what makes him not want to eat dog poop? Well, his desires not to eat dog poop and to eat something else. So his desires are determining what his will would be before God actually creates him and limits the world that God would actualize. But then, so on the one hand, his desires determine his will so that God could know what worlds he would will in. But then he wants to say, but I have libertarian freedom where even my desires don't determine my will. So he wants to have his cake and eat it too. And I just, you can't consistently affirm the metaphysics of Molinism and the metaphysics of libertarian freedom at the same time. They go against each other.
Hey, can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. Just to play devil's advocate here, you were saying that by having the desire and saying that you have free will even with that desire, and that's kind of a contradiction. Why would that be? Couldn't I have a desire and decide to fight against that desire?
Well, so you know, I'm an Edwardian compatibilist, which means I agree with Jonathan Edwards and how he defined compatibilism. So I'm going to say that whatever you do is what your greatest desire is. So the common example is, okay, well, let's say there's a big thing of I don't like chocolate cake, but let's pretend I like chocolate cake, and there's a big slice of chocolate cake in front of me. I have a strong presenting desire to eat the chocolate cake, but I don't eat the chocolate cake. Why? Because I love my family and I want to be healthy and I need to lose weight, and so I lose weight so I can be healthier and live longer and all that kind of stuff. Now, I might feel my desire for cake more. It might be a stronger urge. But by desire, we don't just mean urge, right? We kind of mean this whole confluence of wants and motives and intentionality and all these kind of things. So actually, my greater desire is to be healthy and be here longer for my family. So that's why I will to not eat the chocolate cake, because I have my greatest desire, my strongest desire is not to eat the chocolate cake, but to be, you know, healthy and live here longer for my family. Right. So that strongest desire is what determines what I choose.
That's interesting. Just out of curiosity, do you believe in like people can be brainwashed so then they lose their greatest their control over their greatest desire?
Yeah, so there's an interesting, and Chris brought this up. When Chris, I don't know if you were in the call yet, but we talked about, you know, the 7 different ways that we can mean the word can and so forth. There's Guillaume Bignon, who's a French philosopher, gives this distinction between what's called a categorical ability and a conditional ability, right? So the categorical ability, it was interesting that Eric denied that you needed categorical ability, because it's almost like a staple of libertarian. It's hard to have libertarian freedom if you don't affirm that categorical ability is necessary for moral responsibility. Categorical ability is the ability to do other than what you do, right? So if I eat the chocolate cake, I don't do it freely unless I actually have the ability to choose not to eat the chocolate cake, right? That's categorical ability, and the libertarian freedom is typically going to say that if I don't have categorical ability, then I'm not free, and if I'm not free in that sense, then I'm not morally responsible for my action, right? And that's where brainwashing comes in, right? I'm brainwashed to want the cake, and so therefore I choose it kind of against my will because I don't have the ability to do otherwise, right? We can think of the Manchurian Candidate type of movie. Well, Bignon comes along and says, okay, but there's this other type of ability called conditional ability. And conditional ability is just the ability to do what I want, right? Maybe I don't have the categorical ability to do other than what I want, but as long as I'm able to do what I want without coercion, then I'm morally responsible. So even if I'm determined to eat the chocolate cake, well, if it was the thing I wanted to do anyways, then I'm morally, and I do it without coercion. If it's kind of my God-given nature, I'm not being manipulated to go against my nature, to go against my desires, and I eat the chocolate cake, then I'm responsible for eating the chocolate cake, right? So the compatibilist is going to come along against the libertarian freedom and say, because the libertarian, you heard Eric try to make the gun and the bullet analogy, right? So we don't think the gun, the bullet, and so we go back. But if it's the person who pulls the trigger that they're responsible, right? So if God pulls the trigger, then we don't have freedom, and so therefore we're not responsible because we don't have this categorical ability to do otherwise. So again, in his analogy, he affirms categorical ability, but then in another time he'll say, oh, well, we don't need to have the ability to do otherwise. So he's kind of back and forth. So,
but as far as your belief is concerned,
as far as I'm concerned, as long as you have the conditional ability, as long as you're able to do what you want to do, then as long as you can actualize and do what you desire, then you're morally responsible for your behavior.
Okay.
All right. And one of the reasons I give for this is
someone.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I'm sorry, my 3-year-old came up too, but I was just going to say, just to Seeking's question there, if someone was brainwashed, right, to do something against their will, it would be against what they would desire to do, right, and of course they would be relieved of moral responsibility in that case.
But you believe that's possible for people to be brainwashed?
What's
like
possible?
Thinking that people, I guess what I was looking at is the belief that people do their greatest desire. Well, if brainwashing is possible, then there's a component that says that's not as straightforward as it may seem. Like if we have if our free will is contingent on our greatest desire, yet brainwashing is possible, then how is it that we have that type of free will?
Because if brainwashing is possible, the reason why brainwashing removes your ability is because it's artificially altering what you would desire, right? It's not what you would naturally desire. It's not what you would desire given your God-given nature. It's what someone is manipulating and forcing you to desire against what you would normally desire.
Okay, so let's stop right there. So let's say I have a love for chocolate cake, and I also want to be healthy. So it's my decision which way that I go. So wouldn't that be like libertarian free will? Because I do have that ability. I wouldn't call it brainwashing, but if somebody else has that ability to override my natural inclination, I have the ability to override my natural inclination. Does that make sense?
No, I don't think that follows, because someone can choose by their desire to alter your greatest desire by drugs or hypnosis or whatever it is. It doesn't mean that you can kind of metaphysically step outside of yourself and alter what it is you desire to do something else. Right. So if you choose not to eat the chocolate cake, it's just because you have a stronger desire to not eat the chocolate cake. So that question of, well, what if I override my greatest desire? Well, what would it be that overrides your greatest desire except for a desire that's greater than that? And if it's greater than that, then that just would be your greatest desire.
That's interesting. So in taking the steps to keep myself from wanting the chocolate cake, like maybe I give in the next time, but then the time after that I don't. And over a period of time, I learned to say no to chocolate cake.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's showing my greatest desire is to be healthier, even though I'm sitting here taking the steps to override that natural inclination.
Yeah, because you still might, you still have means that get there. So one of the things that I was going to say is, and I brought this up in the chat conversation, is there's a couple problems with trying to defend libertarian freedom, and I think that Andrew and Chris and Eli were trying to push Eric on this, but I would have phrased it a little bit differently. So let me ask you. If you have two buttons in front of you, you have a red button and a green button, and if you press the red button, you know that in pressing the red button, it is going to causally bring about a state of affairs whereby someone, quote unquote, freely chooses to murder someone. Right? If you press the green button, then it will causally bring about a state of affairs where nobody freely chooses to kill anyone, right? Not that it removes people's freedom. It's just that no one will choose to do it, right? Now you have to pick a button. So if you press the red button, are you causally determining? It's not just that your knowledge of the future state determines it. Is your act of pressing the button an actual?
I'm sorry, you kind of faded out on me there.
Tyler.
Oh, so it's okay. I
No.
thought maybe I'd frozen.
No. It was Tyler Healy. I think he lost his connection. Tyler. Chris, you want to jump in? Because a lot of this stuff is above my head.
It's really interesting.
Is that better?
Oh, yeah, there you go. You're back. Back.
So I don't know where it lost. Did you get the thought experiment, the red and the green buttons?
Yes.
Yeah, it was at the red and green button. Sorry, I was across the house, John. I couldn't jump in. Yeah.
So if you press the red button, and you know that by pressing the red button, it will causally bring about the state of affairs in which it's true that sorry, John, I don't mean you, John, just a random John Doe will choose to murder someone, right? By pressing the button, have you causally determined in any way, are you the first mover of John Doe choosing to murder someone?
I would say I am.
Right. So this is what I wanted them to push Eric on, because he kept saying I'm the first mover of my will. Well, on Molinism, you have to remember that he kept saying, well, God's knowledge doesn't determine it. Okay, well, God's knowing it doesn't, but God's actualizing of this world does. Right? He can choose a world where the proposition Hitler will murder the Jews is true, or well, Hitler will murder the Jews is false. So in World I, that's a true proposition. In World II, that's a false proposition. Now, whatever you think of how Hitler decides or freely chooses or whatever it is, in God's decision to press the button to actualize one world over another, right? Because it can't be different. You can't say he could press the button and then it could end up being different. It can't be different, because otherwise God would be actualizing a different world. He's actualizing that one world with that set of true propositions. And by actualizing the world, he's causally determining what truth values are going to exist in the actual world. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
So it doesn't, that's why I kept asking. I was like, I don't know what it means to say I'm the first mover. You're not the first mover. You contingently exist, and God has determined the truth values of what you choose. Now, you might still be, by your God-given nature, doing the things that you want to do and choosing to do what you want to do. So you're still responsible. But you can't choose otherwise, because if you could choose otherwise, if it was metaphysically possible for you to choose otherwise, then what you're saying is you have the ability to make the world a different world than what God knew he would create, intended to create, and actually would create. It makes you more of the creator than God, right? Which is a major problem.
Well, I have to say I'm not Molinist. I do agree on that point, but I'm still libertarian free will. Just to clear that up, I don't agree with Molinism.
Which is that's my argument against kind of a Molinistic version of libertarian freedom. The metaphysics itself makes it problematic for it to also have a libertarian freedom. I think the metaphysics of Molinism and libertarianism are incompatible with each other, which makes the system inconsistent.
Right.
Against libertarian freedom, I would simply ask, okay, when God actualized the world, when he pressed the button, he knew that you would freely choose, that you would decide based on your desire to log in and join us on this call, right? You're not an open theist. You don't think he learns, right?
Right.
Right. He knew that omnisciently, immutably from before the foundations of the world. He was going to actualize this world, and this is what you would choose to join this server. Do you have the ability to do something other than what God knew and actualized and intended you to do?
I would separate what God knows and what he actualized and what he intended. I think what God knows is separate from that.
Well, why is what God knows separate from that?
Well, what he created is a world full of free will beings. So he knows what we're going to do, but that doesn't mean that he actualizes us to do those things.
But you have to remember, he pressed the button. So when he pressed the button, he says, I'm going to actualize world number one. And world number one, when we're talking about a world, is just a set of propositional truth values, right? And one of those truth values is that seeking the narrow way, right? Seeking the narrow way. I'm just going to call you seeking from now. So that seeking at, whatever time it is, your time zone, will join this call and talk. In actualizing this world, he determined that truth value would be true in this world. He could have actualized another world where you didn't choose that, right? But he actualized this one where you did choose that. And so in actualizing the world, it is a static fact in this world. It cannot change that you would choose to join this call with us, right? So he knows if he actualizes this world, you're going to do that. He actualizes the world. He has omniscient knowledge in the future. You're going to do this. So the question is, do you have the ability to do other than that?
Honestly, I don't think I can answer that question because I wouldn't be able to answer that question according to my beliefs.
Well, which I think is part of the problem. I'm very comfortable saying no. I don't think you can, because what that means is that there in God's creation, there's categorically a thing that God can't know, which is that his knowledge will be true. So if at this time you had the ability freely, and there's nothing that determines your choice, you're absolutely free. You have absolute categorical ability to choose to join this call or not join this call. God actualized the world knowing that you would choose this call. But you still could choose to not join the call, which means that decision just is categorically something that God wouldn't know. And so at every single free decision, God has a belief about what we're going to do, but he literally can't know if that's going to be an instant where we freely choose something else, because we could choose something else. And what that's basically saying is saying that we could do other than what God foreknows. That is, that God's knowledge could be wrong. Right? And I'm gonna err on the side of saying, I'm sorry, no, God's knowledge couldn't be wrong. I'm more comfortable saying God's knowledge couldn't be wrong than I am trying to defend libertarian freedom.
Well, I kind of feel like that's kind of like a boxed belief. Like when well, I'm sure you do, the story of when David cast lots to see if he went into a city, if the people would turn him over.
Yeah, it's the city of Keilah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when I think about that, and David cast lots to see what would happen, and God knew what would happen, and David did the other thing, the opposite thing. So there is no situation in which God would not know what's possible.
Well, remember, it's not a question of what's possible. It's a question of what would happen if something else happened. So if another counterfactual was true, what would happen? And we could ask the question, and I usually phrase it this way. Would God know, or does God know, that had he decreed a different world, what would be true in that different world? Does that question make sense, or is that weirdly phrased?
No, it does make sense. You're saying, does God know all the possibilities?
Right. And
yeah,
so
I believe God would know.
Yeah, so when David says, hey, if I go to Keilah, are they going to kill me? Well, God knows this isn't the world where he decreed that David goes to Keilah. But he can still answer, basically, if we kind of add in the modal operators prior to it. God can basically say, had I decreed that this is the world that you go to Keilah, then it would be true that the men of Keilah would kill you.
But see, I see that as addition. Like, that's the whole thing about if I had decreed the world. Like, that's just added information. God says, if you go there, this will happen.
Right, but what you're doing is you're without realizing it. I'm not saying you're doing this maliciously. What you're doing is you're saying you're building. We all have our kind of theological frameworks that we come to it. What you're saying is that, okay, well, it's actually possible for you to go to Keilah, and by their libertarian freedom, they're going to come and kill you. Right? So you're adding in yours also. Right? All I'm saying is that the passage doesn't tell us that David actually could have gone, right? Because there's an entirely consistent way to say, well, it's just part of God's contingent knowledge. That God has counterfactual knowledge of every possible world, but he knows that this isn't the world that he actualized where David goes to Keilah. Right? It doesn't mean that actually possibly could happen in this world. It just means that if that happened, then that's what would then that would be the result of it. Right? But you can't build in that kind of counterfactual way that it could possibly happen in the world that God actualized.
So
right?
God would know the results of anything you did, even the ones that you did not do.
Yeah, because he knows what would have happened had he actualized that world.
So he knows every contingency, no matter which way it goes.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be that hard to imagine, right? I mean, we finite creatures have counterfactual knowledge. I think that I have the counterfactual knowledge that if a nuclear bomb exploded 1 foot over my head, I would be disintegrated. Right? I have that counterfactual knowledge. I think I have the reasonable belief that that's true. But I'm finite. I'm not omniscient, but I can have counterfactual knowledge about what would happen if a different set of affairs took place. Right? But that doesn't mean that it's actually possible in this world that right now a nuclear bomb is going to go off above my head.
Right.
Right.
Now, this what Seeking was talking about, making a choice. If I put me in the position of the one who's, I'm going to back up one step from choosing a chocolate cake. I'm going to back up and say, I'm going to present someone with a plate of gravel and a plate of chocolate cake. And I'm going to say, you can eat any one you want. Now, who's responsible for that choice? Well, I know doggone well they're going to choose the cake over the gravel. So does it make it my doing or their doing?
Do they have the option to not eat the cake? Not eat
Yeah,
anything?
they can eat the gravel if they want.
Or not eat anything? Or is it just those two options?
Just those two options. I know which one's going to be taken. I know ahead of time. I know before I present it what's going to happen.
Well, that would
My
be you
kid,
controlling them then.
am I?
Yeah, I mean, they can't eat gravel. And you know they wouldn't eat gravel.
I ate
So-
gravel when I was a little kid.
I was the kids eat gravel.
But I licked tires. But if I had a choice,
Well, I don't know. I think if you present people a choice of something you know they'll like and something you know they won't like, then that is in essence controlling because you're only giving them two options.
yeah. So I'm in a sense presenting something that I know which way it's going to go ahead of time. It's not going to surprise me.
Right.
I have a couple of questions. Is it okay if I ask them?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
The first question is how is libertarian free will compatible with prophecy in the Bible, where God actually foretells future events through the prophets in detail, like Christ coming into the world and the specific events around his life, which entailed hundreds of free will decisions? And how is libertarian free will compatible with the cross, where Pontius Pilate, Herod, the Jews, the Gentiles were gathered together to kill Christ? And the scriptures actually say that God predetermined that would happen.
Well, as far as my particular libertarian free will, just to answer the first part of that with how it connects with prophecy, in the Bible, it makes it clear that only God can tell the future. Only God knows any of this stuff, and that's why prophecy is so important, and that's why it points to God, to the fact that he is the creator of everything. So I think it's very compatible in prophecy because that's a component of what makes it so amazing.
Yeah, but in God's prophecies, he details specific events that are going to happen, doesn't he?
Yeah, but I mean, that's a part of him being God. Like,
So
he
could
has
those
that ability.
people who were part of that, who were part of the fabric of that prophecy being carried out in time, could they have chosen something different and caused God's prophecy not to happen?
In my point of view, the fact that God can see the future, that he knows the future, means that he knows what other people are going to freely do.
Well,
do they have free will in that they have the ability to do anything, but God knows all of that already.
Yeah, but they can't choose to do something that contradicts God's prophecy, can they?
No.
So in that sense, they don't have free will.
Well, I think it's just looking at the situation differently, because I think God, let's say, self-fulfilling prophecies where you tell somebody something and in trying to prevent it, they actually cause it to happen anyway. Are you familiar with those self-fulfilling prophecies?
No, not.
I'm sorry, I may be going a little too off on this, so I'll try and bring it back to the main subject. As far as people choosing to do something other than what God prophesied to be done, I think they'd have to know it ahead of time. I mean, is there a prophecy in which God told someone exactly how something was going to happen and they did it exactly that way? I'm pretty sure that anytime a prophecy was mentioned, it wasn't understood until after it happened. So in telling the prophecy that way, there's no way the person the people are going to act against the prophecy.
would
Yeah,
say
but I
the
think
birthplace of Jesus is pretty accurate.
Yeah,
I mean-
I think his point though is that if God prophesies, if God gives a prophecy about something to one of the prophets and foreknows the future, right? This just goes back to my original, the point that I was pointing out of the problem that you can't choose other than what God would actualize. Is that God, if God says that Pilate and Herod would crucify Jesus, how can God say that that's going to happen if literally billions and billions and billions of free will choices need to be made exactly so to get, I mean, Pontius Pilate has to, not eat food the day before that makes him sick to not show up to court that day. And he has to, marry the right woman to have that type of thing. He has to make the right career moves. His parents have to be at the right place to know each other. And they have to, they have to have sex at just the right time so that they conceive Pontius and not a different, I mean, the number of billions of free will decisions that lead up to there. And it just takes one or two different ones for that prophecy to not come true.
Exactly. Like I'm reading Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, where it prophesies Christ coming into Jerusalem. They call it Palm Sunday, which Matthew talks about. There's literally dozens of free will choices being made. Jesus' disciples had to go to a specific place. They had to find the donkey there at the right time. They had to get the donkey. They had to take him to Jerusalem. The people had to be there. They had to say the right words from the Psalms, declaring him to be the Davidic king. And all these free will decisions are coming together and at one event. But if libertarian free will is true, any one of those choices may not have happened, and the whole event may have not come to fruition in the way that it was prophesied in Zechariah. That's my point. And the other thing is, if libertarian free will was true, Jesus may not have been crucified on the cross. Because Pontius Pilate, Herod, the Jews, the Gentiles, they might just decide, hey, we're not going to crucify Jesus. We'll just let him go.
Let me offer you a simplified analogy. Not analogy, it's a scripture. Joseph, when he finally revealed himself to his brothers in Egypt, remember what he told them? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. So when we got the competing wills of men and God, I think that the nuts and bolts of it are something we're never going to be able to get a wrench for. But he does make it work.
Yeah, and that's something that I wanted to bring out too, is that in Molinism, in a lot of this libertarian freedom, there's almost this palpable desire to get God off the hook for appearing like he's, the quote unquote author of evil or whatever it is, right? But that's to confuse the creator and the creature, right? I mean, I have the obligation not to kill somebody, right? God doesn't have the obligation. God can take life whenever he chooses, and he can do so without being, unrighteous or unholy or something like that, right? We often talk about in apologetics and in defending the Christian faith, we often talk about God having morally sufficient reasons for allowing or bringing about what he does, right? So I think that God is of such a nature that whatever God does, whatever God decrees, no matter how, the Holocaust, this might, let's just pick a super extreme example. So let's break Godwin's law again, right? Here's the Holocaust, right? Did God just simply passively allow it because libertarian freedom is of such a good? Well, no. I mean, I think that if it was that kind of good calculus that was happening, I think God would say, well, in this case, no. I would much rather actually take away their freedom. I do this with my kids all the time. I don't say my older son's freedom is of such a good that I'm just going to let him stab his younger brother with a knife, right? And no, I'm going to intervene and stop his freedom from doing that because that wouldn't be a good thing to do. Freedom is not this like ultimate good that triumphs over everything else. But so what we say is, well, God has sufficient reasons. God is the creator of all things. It is for his providence and his plan and for his glory that all things come to pass. Right. So even if divine determinism means that God is causally determinative of all of whatever comes to pass in this world, I don't think that matters. Because God is holy and righteous and just, and he has sufficient reasons for allowing that, namely whatever his providence and purpose and for his own glory is, which is infinitely greater than whatever momentary finite evil might be brought about. And he does so without sacrificing any of his holiness or righteousness. God is the judge of all the earth. He gives life and he takes away life. He kills and he destroys. He brings calamity and he brings peace. I mean, we have all these Bible passages that say that. I just don't get the rhetoric behind that. If God is somehow involved causally in my doing something bad, that therefore God's unholy. I mean, this was what you just brought up about Joseph, Charlie. This was, well, the brothers. They took Joseph, they beat him up, they threw him in a hole, and they sold him into slavery, chattel slavery, terrible slavery, right? The Bible tells us that the brothers intended it for evil. They planned it for evil, right? But God intended it for good. He intended it for a better purpose. The verbs are the same with respect to the same action. They both had plans, intent, a purpose. God's plan just supervened on the plans of the brothers and brought about the greater intention. God had decreed and brought that into existence. So that doesn't mean that God did anything unholy or unrighteous, because God's sufficient reason for allowing it was just for his holy and good purposes.
Yep. I don't know how he does it, and I'm humble enough to say I'm far from figuring it out. I read verses like he's working in me both to will and to do his good pleasure. It doesn't seem like my will and his will aligns too much, and it doesn't seem like to me, because I know me better than anybody, that some of the things I'm doing are pleasing to him, but somehow he works it out, and I'm just humble enough to say I'm going to leave myself at his mercy and make myself available to him to do that.
Yeah, and I think, we can use very shocking examples, right? Child molestation. That's one of the favorite ones that, anti-Calvinists use and people libertarian, right? Are you saying that God decreed the molestation of this child? Now, that's emotionally powerful.
Exactly.
But think about it for a second. Would you rather that God decreed that for a purpose, for his will, for his means, such that the person suffering through it can trust in God that all things will work together for the good of those who love them? It's for his glory, that there's a plan and there's a purpose, and that the unjust person will still be judged, right? Or would you rather have, I don't know why it happened, God's just playing chess and hopefully he'll work something out for it. It's not part of a plan, but aren't you glad that the molester had the libertarian freedom to do it? I don't know how that's more comforting.
Yeah.
It's not. You end up with purposelessly. Well, there's no plan, there's no reason for it. It just happens. Yeah. Doesn't give any hope to my soul. I
don't like using things like child molestation as a football in an argument anyways. It feels crass and insensitive to me, but that's the argument that they use.
Oh, yeah, they'll use something.
If you're going to use it against us, it cuts deeper against you.
Yeah, they go for the most emotive kind of thing they can, and yeah.
Well, with that, I'm in the mood for chocolate cake. I don't know about you guys.
I got a tire over here I'm going to lick. Oh, wait a minute. I gave that up when I was 2 years old.
You're still in Lent, man. You gave that up for Lent.
They got pictures of me with my face all blackened from the rubber, so they rub that into me every once in a while.
You can go and get your plate of gravel.
Yeah. Anyways, I think that's a good stopping point. I think we've had a good discussion, healthy discussion about this. I wish we did have some Molinists to come in to discuss with us, but that's okay. We didn't bash them or anything. We still love them. They're still brothers and sisters in Christ.
Indeed.
They just have a different view. Just have a different view.
Not going to cut them off because of that.
Yeah, no, I enjoy the charitable attitude of everybody in here. That really does me some good.
Amen. So with that, I just want to go ahead and say thank you very much. The council is no longer in session. We'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks again for everyone who joined in tonight. Charlie, Tyler, Chris, Harris, and Andrew, Carrie, and Seeking. Appreciate everybody who showed up. That was a really good insight, and I really do appreciate it. Again, Tyler Vela from the Free Thinkers podcast. I can barely say it. Check out his podcast and his blog. He comes with all sorts of good information. Also, this is kind of a part of the Striving for Eternity ministry, and so we are definitely wanting to say that we are a value for value model. And so if you found any value in this, give some value back, and also support Tyler also in his endeavors. With that, I just want to also plug in my little YouTube channel called Atomic Apologetics, and check it out. I've been posting, well, either you can watch this particular video or all the other council videos after shows, or I've also been posting the Narrow Mind podcast remastered. I've been remastering those audios and just kind of cleaning them up a little bit. They're really, really fantastic apologetics and discussions that they happen, over a decade ago or so. So I've been kind of cleaning those up, and it's been really a blessing. And so anyways, with that, I just want to say thank you very much. And good night and God bless.